Acting Article, Sue Moroney.
Thank you, Mr Chair. Well, look, what a shambles. What a shambles this bill is. And I'm going to start talking about the commencement date to start off with, because I think that is the part that shows what a complete shambles the government has made of dealing with this issue. Because the commencement date for this bill should have been about this time last year, quite frankly, because that is when the government says that it was informed by the Australian government that they were making the law change that was going to bring these supposed returning offenders back onto our shores or into our shores, and yet they were being brought here and have been for almost 12 months now without any supervision, without any of this so-called management and information that this bill puts in place. Mr Chair, I want to share a story about how this bill is too late, because the commencement clause should have been a lot earlier than this, and I know that because in about August this year I went and visited the PARS service in Hamilton. Now that's the service that used to provide prisoners' rehabilitation services when they leave prison here in New Zealand. And I say they used to provide that because, in fact, that organisation has declined to take up the government's new contract in that area because they are so appalled at what the government is requiring in terms of that contract. But I'll come back to that point a little later on. So Hamilton PARS told me in August that they had had a number of these people who have been deported from Australia to New Zealand, just cold calling them, rocking up to their doorstep and telling them that they'd arrived, they'd been deported back, they had no family, they had no support services, and they were knocking on the door of the PARS organisation in Hamilton saying, please help us. And the reason they were doing that was because they had been told by the Australian authorities that the PARS service not in Hamilton, in New Zealand, would help them. That's what they were told when they were leaving or forced to leave the Australian shores. Go and see the PARS service, the Australian authorities said. They will help you. Well, the Hamilton PARS service did help those people because they felt so sorry for them. They were in desperate need of support, but they had no funding to do that. They had no prior notice that they were going to be required to do that. And this is a service that is struggling to survive because of the bad contracting regime that this government has put in place for prisoners coming out of New Zealand services. And they would not sign up to that contract. So here they were, a service that had shed staff very recently because it was principled enough not to sign the dodgy contract that the government had put in front of it to continue to provide that service for leaving New Zealand prisons. And here they were having to struggle to provide that service for these so-called returning offenders who they knew nothing about. There had been nothing put in place for the management of those people, and they have been coming back to New Zealand since the beginning of this year, Minister. What were you doing? What were you doing all that time? Because, I'm sorry to the Minister, what was the Minister doing all of that time while those people were returning in ones and twos and threes and fours to New Zealand shores without any support mechanisms in place and without the forethought of the New Zealand government to do anything for their plight? Now, that's not only a problem for those people in that situation, but that's a problem for New Zealand society, because we know that when people have been in these dreadful situations where they've been deported, where they've been in the sorts of conditions that Kelvin Davis witnessed over in Christmas Island, where they have served their time, where they have then been thrown into detention centres without any certainty about how long they were going to be there. And what I've heard as Labor's immigration spokesperson for many of these people is that they found the conditions in these detention centres, particularly Christmas Island, to be more dangerous than what they had been seeing in prison, so they felt less safe. The reason why I raise that, Mr Speaker, is because it's directly related to the commencement clause, because these people were not getting the support from the New Zealand government when they arrived in New Zealand, and yet they had been in these very dangerous situations, traumatised, arriving on our shores without any help. Mr. Chair, I'm going to divulge, Mr. Chair.
I'm going to call the Honourable Ruth Dyson.
Oh, I was going to divulge.